Mrs. Hannah Brown walked through the wide hallways of Lincoln Middle School, her black shirt crisp and her skirt neatly pressed. She had been teaching for over 10 years, and every student who passed her had learned to greet her warmly. Her calm presence made the busy school seem less chaotic, and her smile was always welcoming. Today was a normal Thursday morning. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the rows of lockers and the colorful posters that lined the walls. Students carried their backpacks, chatting with friends, laughing, and rushing to their classrooms. The familiar sounds of laughter, shoes on the floor, and lockers closing created a rhythm that Mrs. Brown enjoyed. As she walked, she noticed some of her students waving. She waved back, her voice cheerful. "Good morning, Lila. Good morning, Daniel." "Good morning, everyone." She loved seeing the students happy and engaged. But in the corner of the hallway, near the lockers, a small group of boys were whispering and watching her. Leo, Tim, and Marco were 3 boys who often caused small disruptions. They were clever and confident in a mischievous way, always looking for ways to make others laugh at someone's expense. They were not mean at heart, but they enjoyed testing boundaries and pushing limits. Leo nudged Tim and whispered, "Hey, look at her. She looks so serious today. I bet we can get a laugh out of her." Tim grinned. "Yeah, let's do it. It will be funny. No one expects it." Marco adjusted his backpack and said, "Don't overdo it. Just a little fun. She won't mind." The boys moved slowly toward Mrs. Brown, pretending to be casual. They waited until she passed by, and then Leo called out loudly, "Hey, Mrs. Brown, that shirt is so boring. Did you get it from a grown-up store?" Mrs. Brown paused and looked at him calmly. Her eyes met his, and she did not smile or frown. She remained composed. "Thank you for your opinion, Leo. Now shall we focus on learning today?" The boys laughed quietly among themselves, thinking she was scared or unsure. But Mrs. Brown continued walking. Then Marco made a sudden move. He reached out and grabbed the side of her black shirt. It ripped slightly under his fingers. The sound of the tear echoed in the hallway. Students nearby froze. Some gasped. Others quickly turned their eyes, not wanting to get involved. Mrs. Brown stopped immediately and looked down at the small tear. She touched it lightly, her expression calm. There was no anger or panic. Instead, there was a quiet strength in her posture. The boys were shocked by her calm reaction. They had expected her to scream or get upset. Mrs. Brown straightened her shirt as much as possible and faced the boys. Her voice was soft but firm. "Boys, teasing or hurting someone's clothing is not acceptable. Please think about how your actions affect others." Leo laughed, trying to act brave. "Or what, you'll tell the principal?" Mrs. Brown shook her head slowly, her eyes still steady on the boys. "No, but I will show you a better way to behave. Sometimes actions teach lessons more clearly than words." The boys exchanged confused looks. They were unsure what she meant. They had expected a normal reaction, yelling, shouting, or maybe going to the principal. But she stood there quietly, composed and strong. It made them feel uneasy. Mrs. Brown noticed the hesitant looks on their faces. She spoke again, calmly. "You have energy, boys, and you are clever. Use that energy to do something positive. You can make people laugh, you can help others, and you can be a leader. But teasing and hurting others does not show strength. It shows weakness." Tim scratched the back of his head. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Mrs. Brown. We just thought it would be funny." Mrs. Brown's expression softened slightly. "I understand. But being funny does not give anyone the right to harm or disrespect someone else. Humor should make people happy, not upset them." By now, other students had gathered at a safe distance, watching the scene unfold. There was a mix of curiosity and amazement. None of them had expected Mrs. Brown to remain so calm and in control. The boys were starting to realize that the teacher they had thought was gentle and quiet might actually be more capable than they had imagined. Mrs. Brown took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "I am going to step aside for a moment. I hope you will think about your actions while I do." Leo, Tim, and Marco looked at each other nervously. The laughter had faded. The reality of the situation was slowly settling in. Mrs. Brown was not angry in the way they expected, but there was something in her presence that made them feel small. Without another word, she continued walking toward her classroom. She moved with confidence, her steps steady and calm. The students around her watched silently. The hallway, once filled with chatter and laughter, now felt quiet and tense. Once inside her classroom, Mrs. Brown closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. She took a deep breath, feeling a mix of emotions. She was proud that she had handled the situation calmly, but she also knew the boys needed a lesson in respect. She had a plan to turn this into a teaching moment not just for them, but for all her students. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Leo, Tim, and Marco stood frozen. Their usual confidence was gone. They muttered quietly to each other, unsure what to do next. "Did she just not get angry?" Marco whispered. Tim nodded slowly. "Yeah, and I don't know why, but it's kind of scary." Leo's bravado had faded. He looked down at the torn edge of the shirt. "We really messed up, didn't we?" he said quietly. The students who had gathered nearby whispered to each other, sharing surprised looks. "I never thought Mrs. Brown would handle it like that," one student said. Another replied, "She didn't yell, but she made them feel guilty without saying much. That's impressive." Inside the classroom, Mrs. Brown organized her materials, preparing for the lesson. She thought about how she could use this moment to teach something important, not about fear, but about respect, discipline, and understanding. She wanted her students to learn that strength was not only physical, but also mental and emotional. When the boys finally walked into the classroom for their lesson, they were quieter than usual. They avoided looking directly at her, their usual teasing energy replaced with nervous curiosity. Mrs. Brown smiled warmly, welcoming them as she always did. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "Today we are going to continue learning about our project. But I also want to talk briefly about how we treat each other. Actions, even small ones, have consequences. Let's think about how we can show respect and kindness in our daily lives." The boys listened silently. They could feel the weight of her words, and slowly a sense of understanding began to grow. They had learned in just a few moments that strength and confidence came in many forms. Mrs. Brown had shown them that calmness, discipline, and wisdom were more powerful than loud words or teasing behavior. By the end of the first period, the tension had eased. The boys, still nervous, had started to understand the lesson. They began to see Mrs. Brown not just as a teacher, but as someone who could guide them and help them become better individuals. The torn shirt was no longer a symbol of embarrassment or conflict. Instead, it had become the start of a lesson in respect and self-control. Mrs. Brown smiled quietly to herself. Today had not gone as she expected, but it had become a meaningful day for everyone involved. Sometimes, she thought, the most powerful lessons come from unexpected moments, and the best teachers are those who lead by example. The next day, the hallways of Lincoln Middle School were alive with chatter and laughter, just like any normal morning. Mrs. Hannah Brown walked through them with her usual calm and warm smile. Students waved at her, and she returned each greeting. However, in the back of her mind, she was thinking about the previous day. She wanted to help Leo, Tim, and Marco understand a deeper lesson about respect and self-control. She knew they had potential if they learned to channel their energy positively. Meanwhile, the three boys were gathered near the lockers, whispering nervously. The incident with the torn shirt had left them uneasy. For the first time, they realized that a teacher could have strength in ways they had never imagined. "Do you think she's really angry?" Marco asked quietly, looking around to make sure no one else could hear. "I don't know," Leo admitted. "She didn't yell and she didn't hit us. But there was something in her eyes yesterday, something we didn't expect." Tim nodded. "Yeah, it was like she was calm, but we knew she could handle us if she wanted to. I don't think we should tease her again." The boys were beginning to respect her without even realizing it. Respect was something they had never associated with teachers, but Mrs. Brown had a way of commanding it naturally. Later that morning, Mrs. Brown arrived at her classroom to prepare for the day's lesson. On the corner of her desk sat a wooden board, used for demonstrating martial arts techniques during after-school practice. She had a plan for the boys, a way to show them that strength could be used wisely, not just to scare or intimidate others. As the students settled into their seats, Mrs. Brown smiled and began the lesson. "Good morning, class. Today we are going to learn something a little different. We are going to explore the idea of discipline, focus, and respect. These are important not just in school but in life." Some students whispered to each other, curious about what she meant. Even Leo, Tim, and Marco leaned forward slightly, their curiosity growing. Mrs. Brown stood up and moved to the front of the classroom. She picked up the wooden board and held it up. "This is a demonstration of something called Taekwondo. It is a form of martial arts that teaches control, focus, and confidence. It is not about hurting others. It is about learning to control yourself and your actions. The boys exchanged glances. They had never expected their teacher to know martial arts. A few students giggled quietly, but Mrs. Brown's calm voice commanded attention. She placed the board on a small stand and assumed a strong stance. Her movements were precise, controlled, and elegant. The room grew silent as every student watched her. Then, with a swift and powerful kick, she broke the board cleanly in half. The sound of the snap echoed through the classroom. Gasps filled the room. Leo's mouth opened in surprise. Whoa, she actually did that? Tim looked stunned. That was amazing. She's so fast, Marco whispered. I didn't know she could do that. I thought she was just normal. Mrs. Brown smiled gently. Taekwondo is about more than strength. It teaches patience, focus, and respect. Each movement is intentional. You learn to control your body and your mind. You do not use it to scare others or show off. You use it to improve yourself and help others if needed. The boys were quiet, still processing what they had just witnessed. Their teasing from the previous day felt small and foolish now. They realized that their teacher had not only calmness and wisdom, but also physical skill and discipline. Mrs. Brown noticed their expressions and spoke softly but firmly. Strength is not just about muscles or power. True strength comes from self-control, understanding, and respect for others. When you act without thinking, you might hurt someone or create problems. When you act with control, you gain confidence and respect. Leo rubbed the back of his neck nervously. We didn't mean to upset you yesterday, Mrs. Brown. We just didn't think. Mrs. Brown's smile softened. I understand. But thinking before you act is important. You can be clever, funny, and energetic, but always remember to consider how your actions affect others. Tim leaned forward and asked hesitantly, Mrs. Brown, do you really practice Taekwondo? Like seriously? Yes, she replied. I have practiced for many years and even competed nationally. But it is not about winning trophies or showing off. It is about learning life lessons, discipline, and control. The boys were stunned. Marco whispered, National champion? Wow. We didn't know. Mrs. Brown nodded. Yes, it has been a long journey and I continue to learn every day. But the most important lessons I have learned are about patience, respect, and helping others. The students were now fully engaged, and even the boys who had caused trouble were listening attentively. Mrs. Brown continued, I want all of you to understand that every action has consequences. You can choose to be kind, helpful, and respectful, or you can choose to be careless and hurtful. The choice is yours. After the short lesson, Mrs. Brown invited a few students to try a simple practice of focus and balance. She demonstrated small movements that required attention and care. One by one, students tried, and soon the classroom was filled with laughter and concentration. Leo, Tim, and Marco watched quietly. They did not attempt the practice yet. Instead, they reflected on what they had seen. Mrs. Brown's calm strength had made a deep impression. They realized that their behavior from the previous day had been immature. They had underestimated someone they thought was ordinary, but now they knew she was extraordinary, not just in skill, but in character. At the end of the class, Mrs. Brown addressed the boys directly. Leo, Tim, Marco, I hope you understand that your choices matter. Strength is best shown through self-control, respect, and kindness. I trust you will think about this as you continue to grow. The boys nodded silently, still processing everything. For the first time, they felt a genuine desire to improve and make better decisions. They realized that true admiration was not about being louder or stronger than others, but about learning from someone's example and acting responsibly. After school, the boys walked home together in silence. The incident with the torn shirt and the demonstration in the classroom had changed something inside them. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the lessons they had learned. I feel different, Leo admitted. Yesterday we thought we were funny. Today I feel like we were just being careless, Tim agreed. Yeah, she showed us something. Not just about Taekwondo, but about being a better person. Marco nodded slowly. I want to try harder. Maybe we can actually do something good instead of teasing people. That evening, Mrs. Brown returned home thinking about the day. She felt satisfied that she had handled the situation calmly and turned it into a lesson. She also knew that the boys had potential to change. With patience and guidance, they could learn respect, discipline, and responsibility. She looked at her Taekwondo trophies on the shelf, trophies she had earned after years of dedication. But more than the trophies, she valued the lessons they represented. Discipline, patience, control, and respect were the true rewards. She knew that the experience at school had become another opportunity to teach those lessons, and she felt proud that she had used it wisely. The next day, the boys returned to school with a quiet determination. Their behavior had already started to change, and the other students noticed it. Mrs. Brown smiled to herself as she walked down the hallway, seeing the small but meaningful differences in her students. The torn shirt, once a symbol of mischief, had become a turning point, a reminder that strength is not only in skill but in wisdom, patience, and respect. The next week at Lincoln Middle School started like any other day. Students walked through the hallways, chatting with friends and rushing to their classrooms. But a quiet tension hung in the air, especially near the lockers where Leo, Tim, and Marco often lingered. The boys had changed since the incident with Mrs. Hannah Brown's shirt. They were more thoughtful, more aware of their actions, and more careful in how they treated others. Still, curiosity and nervous energy lingered inside them. They could not stop thinking about Mrs. Brown's Taekwondo demonstration and the way she had calmly but clearly shown them that strength could be measured in control and respect. For the first time, they realized that a teacher could be both kind and powerful, and that they had underestimated someone they once thought ordinary. During the first period, Mrs. Brown greeted her students with her usual calm smile. "Good morning, class. Today we are going to explore a new topic. We will talk about teamwork and responsibility, and later we will have a short activity to practice focus and control." The students leaned forward in their seats, curious. Even the boys who had once caused trouble paid careful attention. They were no longer looking for an opportunity to tease. Instead, they were eager to understand and learn. After the lesson on teamwork, Mrs. Brown moved to the demonstration area at the front of the classroom. She placed a small target on the floor and explained, "This activity is about control and precision. You will take turns performing simple movements that require balance and focus. Remember, the goal is not speed or power. The goal is control, awareness, and respect for yourself and others." Some students whispered to each other, excited about the chance to practice something unusual in class. The boys, however, felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. They knew that today's lesson might test more than just their focus. It might test how well they had learned the lessons about respect and discipline. Mrs. Brown demonstrated the first movement herself. She moved gracefully, her arms and legs flowing with precision. She stepped carefully to the target, paused, and executed a controlled kick that stopped just above the floor. Every movement was measured and deliberate. She looked at the class and smiled. "See how control matters more than speed? Every step and every movement has a purpose." The boys watched closely. Leo whispered, "She makes it look so easy." "I wonder if I could ever do that." Tim nodded. "Yeah, but it's more than just moving. It's about thinking about what you do before you do it." Marco remained quiet, his eyes fixed on Mrs. Brown. He had never considered how important patience and focus could be. The incident from the previous week had started something in him, a desire to do better, to respect others, and to control his impulses. Mrs. Brown invited the students to try the exercise. One by one, they moved to the target and attempted the simple movements. Some stumbled and laughed at themselves, while others concentrated deeply and executed the movements carefully. The classroom was filled with energy, but it was positive. Respectful energy this time. Finally, it was the turn of Leo, Tim, and Marco. They approached slowly, each feeling the weight of the moment. Mrs. Brown stood nearby, watching quietly, her calm presence guiding them. Leo stepped forward first. He took a deep breath, remembered her words about control and respect, and performed the movements carefully. He stumbled slightly but regained his balance. When he finished, Mrs. Brown nodded approvingly. "Good, Leo. You focused on your movements and stayed aware. That is what matters." Tim went next. He had been nervous, but he concentrated on each step. His movements were deliberate, and he felt a sense of pride when he finished. Mrs. Brown smiled. "Excellent, Tim. Notice how staying calm and aware makes you feel confident. That is the strength of control." Finally, Marco approached. He was the most nervous, still thinking about the ripped shirt incident from last week. He hesitated, but then he remembered Mrs. Brown's calm smile and her demonstration of discipline. He took a deep breath and focused. His movements were careful and precise. When he finished, he felt a small but powerful sense of accomplishment. Mrs. Brown nodded. "Well done, Marco. You controlled your movements and your mind. That is how respect begins, with control of yourself." After the activity, Mrs. Brown gathered the students for a short discussion. "Today you learned that strength is not only physical. True strength comes from discipline, patience, and respect for yourself and others. Every action you take has a consequence. You can choose to act carelessly or you can act with awareness. The choice is yours." The boys listened quietly, reflecting on everything. They had learned an important lesson about focus, self-control, and respect. The previous week's mischief had seemed so insignificant now. They understood that being strong was not about scaring others or showing off. It was about controlling yourself and using your energy wisely. After class, the boys stayed behind for a moment. Leo spoke first. "Mrs. Brown, we want to say thank you. We didn't understand before, but we do now. We will try to act better and show respect from now on." Mrs. Brown smiled warmly. "I am proud of you. Understanding is the first step. Acting on it every day is what makes the difference." Tim nodded. "We want to make sure we don't make the same mistakes again. We will think before we act," Marco added. "We didn't realize how important self-control is. We want to be better students and better friends." Mrs. Brown placed her hand on their shoulders gently. "That is the right attitude. Remember, everyone makes mistakes, but learning from them and improving is what counts." Word of the activity spread quickly among the students. Many were impressed by the demonstration and by the calm, disciplined way Mrs. Brown had guided everyone. The boys who had been troublemakers were now quietly admired for their willingness to learn and change. The incident with the ripped shirt, once a source of tension and mischief, had become a turning point. It was no longer about a mistake or embarrassment. It had transformed into a lesson in strength, respect, and personal growth. Over the next few days, the boys continued to act more thoughtfully. They helped classmates, spoke kindly, and avoided teasing others. Students noticed the change and began to trust them more. Even the smallest acts, like sharing pencils or helping someone carry books, reflected the lessons they had learned from Mrs. Brown. Meanwhile, Mrs. Brown continued to teach her lessons with calm confidence. She knew that her students were learning not just from her words, but from her actions. By demonstrating patience, discipline, and respect, she had shown them what true strength really meant. One afternoon after school, she stayed in the classroom to organize materials. She thought about the progress she had seen in the boys. It was a small but meaningful change, and she knew that consistent guidance would help them grow even more. She looked at her Taekwondo trophies on the shelf and smiled. The trophies were not just awards for skill. They represented years of discipline, control, and learning how to use strength wisely. As the sun began to set outside, the boys walked home together once again. This time they spoke with thoughtful voices. "I feel proud of what we did today," Leo said. "It wasn't easy, but I feel like we're starting to understand." Tim nodded. "Yeah, I think we're learning something important. It's not just about being good at school. It's about being good people." Marco smiled. "I think we'll remember Mrs. Brown's lesson for a long time. She's amazing. I never thought a teacher could be so strong and kind at the same time." The boys continued walking, their conversation filled with reflection and hope. The lesson they had learned was clear. True strength comes from control, patience, and respect. They were beginning to understand that strength without wisdom or kindness was incomplete. Inside her classroom, Mrs. Brown looked at the empty desks and smiled quietly. She felt satisfaction in knowing that she had turned a potentially negative incident into an opportunity for growth and learning. Her calm and disciplined approach had shown the students, especially the boys, that true power lies in wisdom, respect, and self-control. That evening, Mrs. Brown practiced her Taekwondo routines in her living room. Each movement was precise, controlled, and deliberate, but her thoughts were not on the practice itself. They were on the students she had taught today. She knew that the lessons of respect, focus, and discipline would continue to grow in them, and that gave her a sense of fulfillment that no trophy ever could. The torn shirt incident had become more than a simple classroom event. It was now a story of growth, understanding, and the beginning of change for three boys who had once thought mischief was fun. They were learning to channel their energy positively, and Mrs. Brown had guided them with quiet strength and wisdom. It had been a few weeks since the incident with Mrs. Hannah Brown's shirt, and the atmosphere at Lincoln Middle School had changed. Students who once whispered about teasing now whispered about respect. Leo, Tim, and Marco had transformed in small but meaningful ways. They helped classmates, spoke kindly, and avoided actions that could upset anyone. Even the younger students looked up to them, noticing how much they had grown. Mrs. Brown continued her teaching with her usual calm and confident presence. Her lessons were full of patience and wisdom, and her classroom had become a place where students felt safe, encouraged, and inspired. She noticed the subtle changes in her students and felt satisfaction in knowing that the lessons of respect, focus, and discipline were taking root. One morning, during the second period, Mrs. Brown entered the classroom carrying a small bag. The students were curious. She placed it on the table and smiled. "Good morning, class. Today we are going to try something new. This will test what you have learned about focus, teamwork, and self-control." The students whispered among themselves, excited and a little nervous. Even Leo, Tim, and Marco felt a flutter of anticipation. They were eager to see what their teacher had planned, but they also wondered if they were ready. Mrs. Brown opened the bag and revealed several soft foam sticks and small targets. "We are going to have a controlled practice activity," she explained. "This is safe, but it will challenge your focus and control. Remember, the goal is not to compete against each other. The goal is to practice self-discipline and teamwork." The students nodded, ready to participate. Mrs. Brown demonstrated first. She picked up a foam stick and aimed gently at a target on the floor. With careful precision, she tapped the target without letting her movements become rushed or careless. She turned to the students. "See how controlled movements allow accuracy and success? Hurrying or acting without thinking can lead to mistakes or even accidents." The students practiced one by one. Some were fast and clumsy, while others moved slowly and carefully, showing clear focus. The room was filled with laughter and concentration. Mrs. Brown walked among them, offering encouragement and guidance. Finally, it was the turn of Leo, Tim, and Marco. The foam sticks felt heavier than expected, and balancing the movements required focus. Leo took a deep breath. "We can do this," he whispered to himself. He remembered the lessons of the past weeks: respect, focus, and control. With careful steps, he tapped the target gently, keeping his movements deliberate. Mrs. Brown nodded. "Good, Leo, that is controlled action. You focused on your movements and succeeded." Tim followed next. He focused on the target, recalling how Mrs. Brown had taught them to control their actions and mind. He performed the movements carefully, tapping the target successfully. Mrs. Brown smiled. "Excellent, Tim. Focus and awareness are more important than speed." Marco hesitated for a moment. He was nervous because the foam stick felt awkward in his hands, but he remembered Mrs. Brown's lessons and the confidence she had inspired in him. Slowly and carefully, he tapped the target. Success. Mrs. Brown nodded approvingly. "Well done, Marco. You stayed calm and focused. That is the essence of strength and respect." The activity continued for the rest of the class. Students learned the value of patience, balance, and control. They discovered that rushing or acting without awareness could lead to mistakes. Mrs. Brown reminded them gently that these lessons applied to life, not just the classroom. After the activity, Mrs. Brown gathered the students in a circle. "Today's lesson shows that challenges are part of life," she said. "They may seem difficult at first, but with focus, self-control, and respect, you can overcome them. True strength comes from calmness, wisdom, and consideration for others." The boys listened attentively. The experience reinforced everything they had learned. They realized that strength was more than skill. It was about thoughtfulness and care. As the students left the classroom for lunch, Leo, Tim, and Marco stayed behind to speak with Mrs. Brown privately. "Mrs. Brown," Leo began, "we really want to thank you. You've taught us a lot. We understand now that being strong is not just about being clever or fast. It's about being careful, respectful, and responsible." Mrs. Brown smiled warmly. "I am proud of all three of you. You have made great progress. Remember, the lessons of respect and self-control are ongoing. Life will give you challenges, and the way you respond will show your true strength." Tim asked, "Do you think we could do more? Like learn some of the moves you know in Taekwondo?" Mrs. Brown considered it for a moment. "Yes, I can show you some basic movements after school. But remember, these moves are tools for control, confidence, and discipline, not for showing off or hurting anyone." The boys nodded eagerly. They had learned their lesson and wanted to continue growing. The idea of learning from a national champion inspired them to be patient, disciplined, and focused. After school, the boys gathered in the small gym at Lincoln Middle School. Mrs. Brown had set up a safe space for practice, with mats on the floor and targets for exercises. She began with simple stretches and warm-up movements, explaining how flexibility, balance, and calmness were important in martial arts and in life. The boys listened carefully, mimicking her movements. Leo moved with careful attention, making sure each step was deliberate. Tim focused on keeping his balance and control, while Marco concentrated on precision. Mrs. Brown walked among them, offering gentle corrections and encouragement. After the warm-up, she introduced basic Taekwondo techniques. She demonstrated slow, controlled kicks and blocks, explaining the importance of focus and discipline. The boys practiced under her guidance, learning not just the physical movements but also the mindset that came with them. "You see," Mrs. Brown said, "martial arts is about patience and respect. Every movement has a purpose. Every action matters. You are learning more than kicks and blocks. You are learning control, awareness, and responsibility." The boys nodded. They were beginning to understand that martial arts was more than physical skill. It was a way of thinking and living. As the session continued, Mrs. Brown challenged them with a simple test. She set up a target on the floor and asked them to move carefully and tap it with precision, just as they had in class. But this time she added a slight twist. They had to complete the movement while staying aware of their surroundings and avoiding small obstacles she placed around the target. The challenge tested their focus, control, and patience. Leo moved slowly and carefully, successfully tapping the target. Tim stayed calm, aware of the obstacles, and completed the movement smoothly. Marco concentrated deeply and managed to execute the task perfectly. Mrs. Brown nodded proudly. "Well done, boys. You have shown control, focus, and awareness. This is how true strength is developed. Remember, these lessons are not just for martial arts. They are for life." The boys left the gym feeling a sense of accomplishment. They realized that learning to control their actions, focus their minds, and act with respect was a powerful form of strength. The lessons they had learned from Mrs. Brown had not only improved their behavior, but had also inspired them to become better individuals. Over the next few days, the boys applied their lessons in every part of their lives. They helped classmates, spoke kindly, and remained calm in situations where they might have been careless before. Even small actions like holding the door for someone or sharing materials reflected the growth they had experienced under Mrs. Brown's guidance. The incident with the ripped shirt, once a source of tension, had become a turning point. It had led to lessons in strength, discipline, respect, and self-control. Mrs. Brown's calm wisdom and skillful guidance had transformed 3 mischievous boys into young individuals capable of understanding the true meaning of strength. By the end of the week, Lincoln Middle School had a quieter, more respectful atmosphere. Students admired Mrs. Brown not only for her skill in Taekwondo, but for her ability to teach life lessons through calm example and careful guidance. The story of the ripped shirt had become a tale of growth, transformation, and respect. Mrs. Brown continued her work, always ready to guide her students with patience, wisdom, and quiet strength. She knew that the lessons she had taught the boys and all her students would last far beyond the classroom. And she felt proud, knowing that true strength was measured not by power alone but by control, discipline, and respect for others. The weeks following the Taekwondo lesson had brought a noticeable change to Lincoln Middle School. Students walked through the hallways with a sense of calm and respect. Leo, Tim, and Marco, once known for their teasing and mischief, had become quiet leaders among their peers. Their behavior reflected the lessons Mrs. Hannah Brown had taught them. Strength is more than physical skill. It is control, patience, and respect. Mrs. Brown continued her teaching with the same calm and confident presence. Every class was a chance to guide students not only in academic subjects, but in life lessons as well. She had always believed that education was more than books and exams. It was about preparing students to face life with wisdom, discipline, and kindness. One afternoon, the principal, Mr. Foster, visited her classroom. He watched as Mrs. Brown guided the students through an activity that combined learning and teamwork. Students moved carefully, supporting one another and following instructions with focus. Mr. Foster smiled. Hannah, the change in the students is remarkable. I have noticed a difference in their behavior and attitude. You have turned what could have been a negative experience into a positive lesson for the entire school. Mrs. Brown nodded gently. Thank you, Principal Foster. The students are capable of great things when they are guided with patience and understanding. Sometimes challenges help them discover strengths they did not know they had. Meanwhile, Leo, Tim, and Marco had taken their lessons to heart. They continued to practice the basic Taekwondo movements Mrs. Brown had taught them, understanding that the exercises were as much about mental focus and respect as they were about physical skill. One morning, during a free period, the boys gathered near the school gym. I feel proud of how far we have come, Leo said quietly. I never imagined that a small incident could teach us so much. Tim nodded. It's not just about the moves we learned. It's about thinking before we act and treating others with respect. I feel different now. I want to help others instead of teasing them. Marco smiled. Mrs. Brown is amazing. She taught us without yelling or punishing us. She just showed us what strength and respect really mean. I want to keep practicing and improve every day. Mrs. Brown often observed them from a distance, feeling proud of their progress. She knew that the lessons of control, patience, and respect were becoming a part of their character. It was clear that the torn shirt incident had been the turning point that led to personal growth for the boys and positive change in the school environment. One afternoon, Mrs. Brown decided to organize a small martial arts demonstration for the entire school. She wanted students to understand that Taekwondo was about discipline, focus, and respect, not just fighting or power. She invited volunteers to join her in simple exercises that would teach balance, control, and awareness. Leo, Tim, and Marco eagerly joined the demonstration. They moved carefully and deliberately, following Mrs. Brown's instructions. Other students watched with fascination as the boys, once known for mischief, performed the exercises with precision and focus. Mrs. Brown spoke to the audience. Taekwondo is not about showing strength to others. It is about understanding yourself, controlling your actions, and respecting everyone around you. Each movement teaches patience and focus, skills that are important in life as well as in martial arts. The students applauded, not just for the skill, but for the lesson behind it. They understood that strength came from within, and that respect and discipline were far more valuable than showing off or teasing others. After the demonstration, the principal addressed the students. I am proud of the growth I see in all of you. This demonstration shows that true strength is measured not by what you can do to others, but by how you control yourself, show respect, and help others grow. Leo, Tim, and Marco felt a sense of pride. They realized that their behavior had a direct impact on their peers and the school environment. They were no longer just students, they were role models. They understood that every action, no matter how small, could influence those around them positively or negatively. Over the following months, the changes in the school became permanent. Students who once laughed at teasing began standing up for others. The boys continued to grow as leaders, helping classmates, volunteering for activities, and practicing the lessons of focus and control they had learned from Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown continued to teach and guide them patiently. She introduced new lessons about teamwork, self-discipline, and respect, always using calm example rather than punishment. Her approach showed the students that kindness and wisdom were powerful tools in shaping a positive environment. One day, during a school assembly, Mrs. Brown was asked to speak about her experience with Taekwondo and teaching life lessons. She stood on the stage, calm and composed, and addressed the students. Strength, she said, is more than physical skill. True strength comes from self-control, patience, and respect for others. Life will challenge you in many ways, and the way you respond shows your character. Remember that every action has a consequence and every choice matters. Use your energy to lift others, not to bring them down. The students listened attentively. Leo, Tim, and Marco sat in the front row, their posture straight and attentive. They knew that Mrs. Brown's words were more than a lesson. They were a guide for life. After the assembly, many students approached Mrs. Brown to thank her. Some shared stories of how they had applied her lessons in their daily lives. Others asked for advice on handling difficult situations. Mrs. Brown smiled at each student, offering guidance and encouragement. Even the younger students who had once been scared of teasing now approached her confidently, knowing that she was a teacher who could guide them wisely. Her influence had reached every corner of the school, creating an environment of respect, kindness, and understanding. As the school year continued, Leo, Tim, and Marco continued their Taekwondo practice after school, refining their skills and improving their focus. They remembered the lessons of control, patience, and respect in every movement. The small gym became a place where they learned more than martial arts. It became a place where they learned life lessons they would carry with them forever. Mrs. Brown watched them, proud of their progress. She knew that the changes she had helped create were lasting. The torn shirt incident, which could have been a moment of conflict or fear, had become a story of growth, learning, and transformation. By the end of the year, Lincoln Middle School was a different place. Students treated each other with respect. Misbehavior was rare, and the atmosphere was supportive and encouraging. The story of Mrs. Brown's calm strength and the lessons she had taught became a legend in the school, a reminder of the power of patience, discipline, and respect. One afternoon, Mrs. Brown sat in her classroom, looking at her students as they packed up for the day. She felt satisfaction in knowing that the lessons of respect, focus, and self-control had taken root. The school was filled with kindness, and students were growing into thoughtful and disciplined individuals. Leo, Tim, and Marco approached her, smiling. "Mrs. Brown," Leo said, "thank you for everything. We have learned so much from you. We want to continue practicing not just Taekwondo, but being better people every day." Mrs. Brown smiled warmly. "I am proud of all of you. Remember, learning never stops. Every day is a chance to grow, improve, and help others. Keep using what you have learned, and you will continue to become strong in all the ways that matter." The boys nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They realized that the lessons they had learned were more valuable than any award or recognition. They understood that true strength was measured not by power but by control, respect, and the ability to make positive choices. As the students left for the day, Mrs. Brown looked out of the window at the school grounds. Sunlight illuminated the playground and the hallways, where laughter and learning filled the air. She felt proud, knowing that her students had grown not only academically but also as individuals with respect, patience, and understanding. The torn shirt incident, once a moment of mischief and tension, had become a turning point in the lives of her students. It had inspired growth, transformation, and lasting change. Mrs. Brown knew that her students would carry these lessons with them far beyond the walls of Lincoln Middle School, shaping the people they would become. In that moment, she realized that true teaching was not just about books and exams. It was about guiding students to discover the best in themselves, to grow with wisdom, and to act with strength and respect. And with that, she smiled, confident that her students had learned a lesson that would stay with them forever.